We have the Canon R6 versus the R6 Mark II when it comes to video. Let's get undone. That probably only works for Gerald. Hi, Jared with VisibleTour.com, and welcome to probably my favorite test that I got to do with the R6 versus the R6 Mark II, because a lot of the times these tests actually help me out. These aren't typical tests that I would do. I would just say, hey, you know what? This is the upgrade. I'm going to use it. I'm going to learn the tool. But now this really confirms that I made the right decision. So we are going to take the R6 versus the R6 Mark II. We're going to go outside. I'm going to show you a comparison. We're going to start out in log. I really like to talk with my hands. If you haven't noticed, it's a sign of a good communicator. At least that's what I tell myself. So oh, there I go again. I'm just using my hands a lot. So we're going to go outside. This is going to be shot in log. We're going to be looking at a graded version and then later on showing the non-graded version compared to the graded. We're also looking at focus. And I will tell you, there is going to be a little bit of a shock when it comes to the focus, and I'm hoping a lot of these are going to be addressed in firmware updates in the future. So when we go outside, we're going to be putting the camera side by side. The R6 is going to be on the 15 to 35 millimeter 2.8 RF lens, and the Mark II is going to be on the 24 to 70. They're both going to be set at 35 millimeters at 2.8, and they are going to both be in log format. I'm going to show you the graded. Later on, I'm going to show you ungraded versus graded. They're the exact same edit on both of them. You're going to notice a huge, in my opinion, color shift in difference. And there is one that I'm definitely more partial to, and maybe that might be surprising to you. So we will discuss that when we get back in here, but we're going to be looking at the comparison in 24 frames per second. Later, I'm going to bring you in. I'm going to show you 60 frames per second. I'm going to slow it down a little bit. And one of the last tests is just going to be a standard profile. We're just going to bring it into standard. It's not going to be in log. They are almost identical. C-Log, totally not identical. The comparison of C-Log between the two cameras is quite vast in my opinion, and that may help you make a decision when you're looking at the R6 versus the R6 Mark II. So let's get out there and then we'll come back in here and I'll give you my final thoughts on which one I preferred and which one may be best for you. Right off the bat, what I love about the R6 Mark II is that the R6 Mark II actually has the blinking screen with a red frame around it, and that shows me that that thing is recording. When I look at the R6, which is right here, I have to make sure it says record in that upper corner and that time is actually moving, where it's very obvious when I'm doing my recording on the R6 Mark II that it is recording, which is nice. So we have the Canon R6 Mark I there and the R6 Mark II right here, both at the exact same settings, 1/50th shutter, 2.8, 24 frames per second, and the base ISO of 800 because we are in CLOG3 with this, with the cinema gamut. So in this test, we're going to do some tracking in 24 frames per second. We're also going to then eventually look at grading the log footage. So the things to pay attention besides the focus and make sure everything is all in focus is kind of the sharpness and the grading quality of these images. I'm going to grade them exactly the same. And when I bring it into DaVinci Resolve, I will show you what that is like. Okay, I'm going to move around and we're going to see tracking facing forward. So it is at 35 millimeters. I forgot to mention, but the R6 Mark I is at 15 millimeter to 35 millimeter RF 2.8. And we have the 24 to 70 at 35 millimeters on the Mark II at 2.8. So they should be equal, good quality, focal length. You're going to see it a little bit wider on the R6 Mark II because it is using the full sensor, where the R6 does crop in a tiny bit. We're also going to do 60 frames per second in a little bit as well. So tell me how this tracking looks like. We're going to get a little bit closer and now you're going to see more of a difference. So we'll get it there, and now the bokeh in the background should be more blurred out. So if I move here, and I noticed that it did focus. So here on the far, whoop, there, it caught my eye. So it is on eye autofocus, and if we get right here on the far end, R6, well, there it goes, you know, sticking in pretty good. And the R6 Mark II is not as sticky for some reason on this one. And when we get back in, I will give you my thoughts on what this looks like as well. Yeah. Could this be a little disappointing on the R6 Mark II with the autofocus stickiness? I don't know. I will tell you the image quality will not be disappointing. Okay, so now we're gonna try something different. It is on eye autofocus on both of these, so we're gonna give them no eyes. So, no eyes, and I'm gonna walk around back here, see how it does the subject testing, or the subject tracking, I should say. So, we're tracking it. I don't have eyes in the back of my head, even though my kids may think I do. And how did that catch it? So, right here, R6 Mark II does seem to not catch it as fast for some reason. I do believe these are on the same settings. I will mention if they are not when I'm back in the office to give you my final analysis on this. So we are off and pop back in here. Okay, this test is the 60 frames per second test, so it does get a little bit softer when it comes to the R6 versus the R6 Mark II, because the R6 Mark II is going to be using that oversampled image where the R6 is not going to be doing that. So it should be a little bit sharper, but you tell me. Settings are 2.8, 1/25th shutter, same focal length, which is 35 millimeters, and the ISO now, I bumped it up, it's getting a little bit darker. So this will be a good test with the noise. It's 4000 ISO, still CLOG3. So this will probably be one that we grade. And how does that look with the tracking with the, when it comes to the R6? So here I'm gonna come out of frame and back into frame. So the 60 frames per second, I am going to slow this down because this is going to be on a timeline of 24 frames per second. And so I'm going to slow this down to 40%. So I'm going to run and see what that slow motion looks like and that tracking. So 2.8 is always going to be tougher to track. This is the shallow depth of field, so this is a good test when it comes to that. We'll see how that goes. Okay, and now in this test, I'm going to make sure I'm in focus because now I'm going to show you what the color grading looks like when color grading CLOG3 and DaVinci Resolve. So this is what it looks like without it. This is what it looks like with it. So this is what it looks like without it. This is what it looks like with it. So this is the exact same settings applied to both of the footages. Do you notice a difference? So I have the ISO at 3200 on both these cameras, and we are at the standard profile. So no more C-Log on here. This is what the image looks like right off the bat. And again, this would be something you would want to do if you're kind of on a run and gun, you want to get it over with, you don't want to do a lot of color grading, and you're in a controlled space like a studio, which this is again how I do it in my studio. I don't typically shoot in log in the studio, maybe I should. I do it on the go. And does the tracking look any different with that? And these are the colors, so we don't need to be grading these. And I will tell you, when it comes to video, there is no limit when it comes to the Mark II, and that's looking good. We are in the cold, so I don't think the Mark I is going to have a problem right now. And the nice thing is you can lower the ISO when you're not doing log, and it still stays pretty clean because it's already processed. And just for fun, let's get out and see how the tracking is when it's not in C-Log. Back in, how's the tracking? Here, if I get right here. Oh, it's not catching me very well there. R6 seems to be catching me in autofocus a little bit better. Maybe this might need to be a firmware update when it comes to the R6 Mark II. All right. Yeah, that really isn't catching in very well. Canon, let's do a firmware update, buddy. Look at that. Yeah, that is not as sticky as the R6, but the R6 has had so many firmware updates. It's been awesome. I've been very happy with Canon's firmware updates, and I'm thinking people like me doing tests like this can only help. And if you have a YouTube channel, and even if you have a few subscribers, do video tests like this, because the more Canon and other manufacturers see this, these are things to fix. That's what this, you know, camera community is about, and tech community, you know. It's the consumers that wag the tail, or it should be at least. Okay, we're gonna go to 60 frames per second in the standard profile. Okay, this is 60 frames per second, not in C-Log, both are in standard format. So if you didn't want to grade in C-Log, this is what those are going to look like in the 60 frames per second. And so all the settings are exactly the same when it comes to the R6 Mark II and the R6 Mark I, but in standard mode. And again, when I am in a studio setting, this is the mode that I typically use, because I really don't want to grade CLOG3. But when I'm in the field and I'm shooting real estate videos and people, it's easier to grade that. But on the go, I do like to just put it in standard and a little bit flatter, and then you can alter it later on. But this is what the 60 frames per second looks like. And ISO, still 4000 ISO on this footage. So this would really kind of show what that grain would look like on both of those cameras. So as you can see, the R6 colors versus the R6 Mark II were quite different. There was more of a magenta orange look when it came to the C-Log on the R6 versus the R6 Mark II. I personally prefer the R6 Mark II. I felt like those colors were a lot more natural, especially after grading them. It just looked awesome. Now, when it came to the standard profile, all at its default, they're almost identical. It's hard to tell a difference. The only difference you can tell is that it is sharper on the oversampled R6 Mark II over the R6. And the same thing goes with the 60 frames per second. In standard, not a whole lot of difference, but there is a lot more detail in the C-Log with the R6 Mark II than the R6. Now, when it came to focus, well, that was a little bit shocking for me, because I did a lot more tests last week too, and I was just thinking, well, maybe it's just me. But then doing it on this test, it does confirm that there is a little bit of loss of focus when I'm in a corner of the frame or on a far end, where the R6 seemed to fix that. When I first got the R6, there was autofocus issues, but over time we had a lot of firmware updates, and that autofocus really did improve over time. And I'm hoping the same thing happens with the R6 Mark II. Let me know in the comments below if you notice that color shift that I'm talking about with that magenta, and then it's more on the green tone with the Mark II. For me, the Mark II was a lot more pleasing to look at, easier to grade, sharper. It just was better and totally worth the upgrade from the R6. You let me know if that's the same for you. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, because I'm going to be doing a little bit more comparisons between these two cameras, and eventually I'm just going to focus solely on the R6 Mark II and give a very definitive, specific review on the R6, something that I really can't do when I'm comparing the two cameras together. I'm going to get more into the details of the ergonomics and everything. And so if that's something you're interested in and you're not subscribed yet, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.